It is not blindness or deafness that brings me my darkest hours.
It is not blindness or deafness that bring me my darkest hours.
Imagine what it would be like if you could not hear.
Hey, you!
Imagine if you could not speak. Imagine if you could not see. Wouldn't you still want your rights as an individual? In 1882, a great woman was left blind, deaf, and mute from an illness at 19 months old, but became one of the world's greatest pacifists. She was born on June 27, 1880 in Tuscumbia, Alabama. She was the first of two daughters born to Arthur H. Keller and Catherine Adams Keller. As she was growing up, she learned to deal with her disability, but because of the lack of seeing, hearing, and speaking, she grew frustrated. She was often called a wild child because of the frequent tantrums, which often included breaking dishes and even slapping and biting family members. Well-meaning friends and relatives suggested that she should be institutionalized, but her parents never gave up on her. In 1887, Anne Sullivan came to teach this great woman, which resulted in her making tremendous progress with the ability to communicate. With Anne's help, she went on to college, graduating from Radcliffe with cum laude in 1904. After college, she traveled the world spreading her beliefs in the rights of the unprivileged people of America. She had a responsibility to fight and make wrongs right, a responsibility to give people the rights they deserve. This amazing woman was Helen Adams Keller. In 1908, Keller read H.G. Wells' New Worlds for Old, which influenced her views about radical change. This led Keller to join the Socialist Party in 1909. She then wrote articles in support of socialist ideas, campaigned for its candidates, and lent her name to help striking workers. She was universally praised for her courage in the face of physical disabilities, but she now found herself criticized for her political views. The editor of the Brooklyn Eagle attacked her radical ideas, saying that they are the mistake sprung out of the manifest limitation of her development. As a response, Keller wrote an essay entitled How I Became a Socialist, which was published in The Call, a socialist newspaper. She wrote, "At the time, the compliments he paid me were so generous that I blushed to remember them. But now that I have come out for socialism, he reminds me and the public that I am blind and deaf, and especially liable to error." Despite what others thought of her, Helen participated in some of the greatest movements of social justice of her time. She discovered that poor people were more likely than the rich to be blind, and soon connected the mistreatments of blind to the oppression of workers, women, and other groups, leading her to embrace socialism. To this cause, she said, only by taking the responsibility of birth control into their own hands can we roll back the awful tide of misery that is sweeping over them and their children. Keller also argued that capitalists wanted workers to have large families to supply cheap labor to factories, but forced poor children to live in the miserable conditions. Helen was a great supporter for women's rights and women's suffrage. She wrote that women have discovered that they cannot rely on men's chivalry to give them justice. Keller also supported birth control and praised its leading advocate, Margaret Sanger. In 1912, Keller joined the Industrial Workers of the World, also known as the Wobblies. Helen said that the Industrial Workers of the World is a labor union based on the class struggle. It admits only wage earners and acts on the principles of industrial unionism. In 1948, Keller visited Hiroshima and Nagasaki, cities destroyed by American atomic bombs at the end of World War II, and spoke out against nuclear war.
She traveled all over the world. The one that meant the most to her was her trip to Japan.
In 1918, she helped found the American Civil Liberty Union, which was initially organized to challenge the U.S. government's attempt to suppress the ideas of and jail or deport radicals who opposed World War I, including socialists and members of the Industrial Workers of the World. Then after 1924, Keller devoted most of her time and energy to speaking and fundraising for the American Foundation for the Blind, but still supported radical causes. Between 1946 and 1957, she visited over 35 countries on 5 continents. Keller, who died in 1968, never saw a contradiction between her crusade to address the causes of blindness and her efforts to promote economic and social justice. She had been, in 1999, dedicated as one of Gallup's most widely admired people of the 20th century. Then, on October 7, 2009, a bronze statue of Helen Keller was added to the National Statuary Hall collection as a replacement for the state of Alabama's former 1908 statue of the education reformer Jabez Lamar Monroe Curry. It is displayed in the United States Capitol Visitor Center and shows Helen as a 7-year-old child standing at the water pump. The statue represents the moment of her life when she understood her first word, water. The pedestal base has a quotation in raised Latin and Braille letters. The best and the most beautiful things in the world cannot be seen or even touched. They must be felt with the heart.
She's a hero to a lot of people because she overcame so many obstacles, and people kept telling her, oh, this girl's not going to amount to anything, and yet she was an icon for so many people with disabilities.
Some think that Helen's story ends with the image of a young deafblind girl and her teacher, Anne Sullivan, at a water pump. However, that moment for Helen changed her life and others that she helped. She lived a life dedicated as a tireless advocate and a fearless activist that opened wide doors for people with disabilities like her own. She was a woman outspoken in her principles that inspired change in public attitudes about the capability of people with visual impairments. As she pushed for revolutionary change in the law, people with disabilities were able to transition into the mainstream education and employment. Helen Keller inspired futures of generations of people with disabilities to live life to the fullest. In changing the world, Helen Keller has taught people that they should respect everyone, no matter what race, disability, class, or gender. She proved that there is nothing that you cannot do.
Simply, she made a life that she was really happy with, and that's hard to do. And she did it. She had good friends, and she had a life she loved.
Me and all my friends, we're all misunderstood. They say we stand for nothing and there's no way we ever could. Now you see everything that's gone wrong with the world and those who lead it. And just to feel like we don't have the means